Hello and welcome. I bought and took a look at the Buture VC90. I assume that it is an ODM product since vacuum cleaners with a very similar configuration can also be found from other, rather unknown brands like Buture. I got it for round about 75 euros. The usual price range is about 120 to 200 euros. On paper, the vacuum cleaner offers quite respectable specifications. However, we will see later that in practice, not necessarily much of that remains. The vacuum cleaner also has an automatic mode that reacts to the power consumption of the main brush motor. We'll take a quick look and listen to that now. In the main brush configuration at the maximum suction level, the vacuum cleaner has a runtime of approximately 15 minutes and 30 seconds. However, this value is somewhat misleading because the vacuum continuously reduces its power and also the brush speed during this time. There can be several reasons for this. One possibility is thermal limitations, meaning that either the battery or the suction motor becomes too warm. However, I assume that the more likely reason is that the required voltage for the full performance can no longer be fully maintained over time. In other words, this is not a fade-free battery. As the voltage drops, the performance of the vacuum cleaner decreases accordingly. Based on the battery capacity of 65.12 watt-hours and the voltage value, this results in an average power consumption of approximately 252 watts over the runtime of 15 minutes and 30 seconds. The full recording of the runtime run is linked in the description so that you can hear and see the power reduction. This reduction in performance should be kept in mind, since in my test runs, the vacuum cleaner was only used with short runtime intervals, allowing the vacuum to cool down. As usual, I first tested everything on my carpets using certified test dust. The vacuum cleaner was then passed over the area 4 or 5 times side by side with overlapping. In these tests, 10 grams for the carpets and 5 grams for the dirt mat were applied and lightly worked into the carpet. The dark and red-blue carpet were tested in max mode only since the auto mode would have switched to the same suction setting. The dirt mat was tested in auto and max mode. Let's take a closer look at the results. We'll start with the red carpet with a dense, thick pile, which is the most difficult one to clean. After a total of 14 passes, the vacuum cleaner managed to pick up 45% of the applied test dust. In other words, 4.5 grams out of the 10 grams were removed. That is a rather poor result. In my testing, only the new Dream V30 performed worse in automatic mode. There will be a separate video about that as well. All other devices I have tested so far perform significantly better. For example, the Dream Z30, which was tested here in max mode, manages to remove 67%. Even a Dyson V8, which is not included in this graph, achieves a result of 70% or higher depending on which cleaning head you use, not to mention more powerful models like the Dyson Gen 5 or the Dyson V11. Those reach 100% removal after only a few passes, even when operating in automatic mode. Let's also compare this with top 7 list for robot vacuum cleaners for this carpet. Here we can see that there are also robot vacuums that achieve much better results. Some models manage above 60% or even more than 70%. The result of this vacuum cleaner is therefore roughly on the level of better robot vacuums such as the iRobot Roomba S9. However, it should be noted that robot vacuums perform significantly fewer passes in this type of test, since they have no forward and backward cleaning pattern like I used it cleaning manually. Therefore, the results cannot be compared directly. To address this, I adjusted the comparison slightly. The second pickup result, meaning the second cleaning pass of the vacuum cleaner, roughly corresponds to the number of passes robot vacuums perform in this scenario. This is not 100% precise, but it provides a reasonable approximation. From this perspective, the roughly 40% achieved here can appear either rather poor or somewhat acceptable, depending on how you look at the mediocre performance of most vacuum robots. It also shows that many robot vacuums are somewhat overrated. The models shown here are my top 7, and there are many, even so-called flagship models, robot vacuums that perform significantly worse, sometimes only reaching around 20% or even less. That's it for putting these results into context. The results become more interesting, or rather better, on the dark blue carpet. Here as well, 10 grams of test dust were applied. The carpet has a very soft pile which makes it somewhat easier to clean. In this test, the Buture VC90 achieves in auto mode a dust pickup rate of 94% after 14 cleaning passes. The result is shown in the red graph. This means it clearly outperforms a Dream Z30 operating in automatic mode. However, it should be noted that on this carpet, the automatic mode of the Buture VC90 effectively corresponds to its maximum mode, because the vacuum automatically switches to the highest cleaning power. We can also see that it slightly outperforms the Dream V30. The Dream V30 was also operating in automatic mode. There will be a separate video about the Dream V30 model as well. Overall, however, the results are roughly on a similar level. A Dyson V11 outsize, on the other hand, already reaches 100% in automatic mode after just 5 cleaning passes, which means it performs significantly better. When compared with robot vacuums, we again see models that perform noticeably better and can also reach 100% dust pickup. Especially when breaking it down to the second cleaning pass of the vacuum, the result here no longer looks particularly strong for a conventional vacuum cleaner. But as stated before, this is my top 7 for robot vacuums, and there are robots performing much worse. Finally, let's look at the dirt mat. In this test, 5 grams of test dust were applied and a total of only 7 cleaning passes were performed. Here it makes a difference whether the Buture VC90 is operated in automatic mode or in maximum mode, since the pile offers less resistance. This means that in automatic mode the vacuum only operates at suction level 2. For that reason, I also tested it in maximum mode. The results in maximum mode are shown in the red graph, while the automatic mode results are shown in the blue graph. In automatic mode, the vacuum reaches 78% after 7 passes, while in maximum mode it reaches 92%. I still need to test a few more devices in this category, but compared to a Dream V30 in automatic mode, the result here only looks reasonably good in maximum mode, but it does not reach 100%. A Dyson V11 in automatic mode, for example, manages to reach 100% after just 4 passes. The performance of the automatic mode is not that great. Looking again at a comparison with robot vacuums, specifically my current top 7, we can see that there is also a robot that achieved 100% here, namely the AEG RX 9.2. Overall, this shows that there are robot vacuums capable of achieving similar or even better results. This becomes especially clear when looking at the second cleaning pass. In maximum mode, the Buture VC90 drops to around 84%, and in automatic mode it falls to only about 58%. The latter is pretty bad compared to vacuum robots in my top 7 listing. Next, let's take a look at the hard floor performance. For this test, I also use certified test dust that simulates typical household dust. A total of 0.45 grams of it was applied to my test area. The test surface is laminate with a slightly textured finish, and there are also gaps between the individual panels. The setup corresponds to the test I also use for my robot vacuum evaluations. I passed over the surface 4 times in total, cleaning in a checkerboard pattern, the same pattern used by robot vacuums. This test therefore roughly corresponds to about 8 robot passes. However, the result does not look particularly good. A significant amount of dust remains both on the surface and inside the gaps. This is actually a typical result for many robot vacuums as well. As an example, the Dream Aqua 10 shows a similarly poor result when using suction only. However, there are robots that can remove this type of dirt without problems and with significantly fewer passes. One example here is the Dyson VC90 that is able to clean the surface and the joints with suction only, and an iRobot Roomba Max 705 combo and 205 combo are able to do the same using their mopping function. Every other mopping robot I have tested so far failed to clean the joints, but they were at least able to get the surface dust free. You can find the test videos on my channel. I also repeated the test with more passes, 8 passes in total. That is significantly more than the number of passes robot vacuums are normally allowed in my tests. Even then, the result does not improve significantly. In the end, there are still clearly visible dust residues left behind. This indicates that the cleaning head likely does not seal well against the floor, mainly because of the non-closable front gates for bigger debris. Other better cordless vacuums are able to clean the surface and joints completely in just 2 to 4 passes, especially with soft roller cleaning heads. Let's briefly revisit the topic of filtration. The manufacturer advertises HEPA filtration. However, this claim by itself is not particularly meaningful because no actual filter specification is provided, and you can call virtually everything a HEPA filter without consequences. In other words, there are no details about the filtration efficiency or any certifications. I was also unable to find any such information on the manufacturer's website. I have already made a very detailed video about this topic, which I will link in the description. For my evaluation, I also looked at how much of the collected test dust ends up in the filter during different tests. This helps to get an idea of how effective the cyclone pre-filtration stage actually is. In the case of the red carpet test, for example, around 33% of the collected test dust ended up in the filter. This suggests that the cyclone filtration stage is not particularly effective. The test dust used here has a particle size of around 200 microns, which is actually still relatively coarse. Another important point is that the filter, what I'm referring to here as the HEPA filter, is in fact the only filter in the system. There is no post-motor filter installed. The device only contains cotton pads used for sound insulation, but no final motor filter. That is obviously not ideal, although adding one might have reduced the suction performance even further. I also inspected the motor compartment after the runtime test, which was performed with some dust already in the dust container. There were visible dust deposits inside the motor compartment, which again suggests that a true HEPA filter is probably not being used here. As mentioned, this is my personal assessment of the situation. I did not conduct laboratory tests that could conclusively prove this with absolute certainty. Furthermore, the filter is not washable, so recurring costs, especially in connection with the rather mediocre cyclone separation, are to be expected. Let's move on to the conclusion. Buy it or not. If you are simply looking for something to occasionally pick up crumbs, then this vacuum could be an option. However, for proper vacuum cleaning, I would rather advise against it and save some money to buy a better performing model of other vendors in used or refurbished condition, especially at a price point of 150 euros or more. As we've seen, you basically have to use the maximum mode all the time to achieve acceptable results that will kill the battery pretty fast, and you may be not even able to use all the time due to the scene power reduction, and even then, the performance is not particularly impressive. In some cases, it only reaches the level of other vacuums that perform poorly in automatic mode. That said, if you pay a price similar to what I paid, around 75 euros, it might still be worth considering for the mentioned purpose of crumbs pickup. It can make sense for areas like entryways, where there is also a risk of vacuuming up liquids. For picking up crumbs or coarse dirt, the performance is definitely sufficient. That is exactly the purpose I use this vacuum for at home. I purchase all devices myself. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and maybe support me through my Ko-fi link. I would really appreciate that. I might also take another look at this vacuum from a modding perspective. Interestingly, it uses the same connector as Dyson devices. The voltage is different, but we'll see what might be possible there. Thanks for watching and see you next time.